Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Tareq Al-obadi. Today, I have an interview with one of an interpreter who has a very good experience in this field. So, I will ask him to introduce himself and the language he already learned.
Okay. My name is Osama Zubair. I used to be interpreter for some time, and for most of my experiences, I interpreted the English language to my native language, Arabic, and vice versa.
Mr. Isama, he is from Sudan, which the native language there is Arabic language. But could you tell me what like certificate you have in English language that make you like experience in interpreter from English language to Arabic language and the opposite?
Okay. So first of all, my proficiency in Arabic emanates from the fact that I am a native speaker of Arabic. But regarding the English language, I am a proficient speaker of English. Testified by the International English Language Testing System. I also had a previous course in an English institute back in my home country about how to translate and interpret English to other languages. This is in addition to some courses that I took by myself. Some of them were delivered online to develop my knowledge in the field of translation and professional interpreting.
That's great. I would like to ask you, how long have you been as an interpreter?
Okay, maybe my work experience in the field of interpreting and translation in general and interpreting in particular, if I can count it by the number of hours I work, it could be around 6 to 8 months of work. I mean, no, not exactly 6 or 8 months, but this is the number of work experience calculated in hours.
That's good. Based on your experience as an interpreter, okay. Like example, what does it like interpreting based on your experience?
Okay. So interpreting based on my experience is a highly demanding field. First of all, an interpreter is expected to deliver the exact translation or the exact interpreting of a number of sentences in a very short period of time, and the interpreter is expected to be as exact as possible depending on the situation. For example, in some parts of my work experience as an interpreter, I had to help some tourists, some foreigners. In these cases, interpreting was not a highly difficult task because there was some flexibility. The tourists or the foreigners were mostly looking for a short answer, so it wasn't something difficult. But in other parts, for example, one day I was interpreting in a conference that was organized by one of the foreign organizations in our language institute back in my home country, and I had to be as exact as possible because the guests were speaking on highly sensitive topics such as politics, social issues, and the speaker sometimes spoke very fast, and I was given the challenge of interpreting as accurately as possible and in a very short period of time.
As I heard, like interpreter need to be like fluent or accurate, like his mother tongue language, okay, or his language, native language, with also the another language he will interpret it to, or the opposite. Okay, as like your language is or your native language is the Arabic, and as you know, the Arabic is like complex language, many grammatical, many vocabulary, and for me also as English student, and now I also study like one subject as to be as a partner interpreting. So it's hard, like there is many like terms. It's hard to translate it to English. Do you have any skills, or did you improve any skills in your mother tongue that help you to get this experience as an interpreter?
Okay. Definitely yes. There is a large number of skills that an interpreter needs to master in order to convey the exact meaning, the accurate meaning. And as you mentioned, for example, when we interpret any language, such as English, for example, to Arabic, it's a challenge because we are interpreting to a language that is a little bit complex. It has its own structure. This is true of any language, but especially of Arabic. In my case, in order to be able to interpret to Arabic, I had to first have a very good mastery of Arabic itself. I had to have a very good knowledge of grammatical structures. I had to have a very good knowledge of the literature, the kind of idioms that exist in the language, what are used by native speakers. And in this area, for example, interpreters usually work in international organizations, and if we take the United Nations as an example, the UN has many interpreters, maybe thousands of them, working to translate the 5 official languages into maybe almost all the languages that are spoken in the world right now. And there is a very golden rule there that is used in the UN. Any interpreter or translator can only interpret or translate to his or her native language. Because if I am a native speaker of Arabic, I know English, I interpret English to Arabic, then my listeners will be very comfortable listening to me. I will be aware of any, syntactical subtleties. I will guide my listeners very well. If there is any kind of idiomatic language, I will be very comfortable in translating it. So I will ensure that the meaning is very accurate. So interpreters usually work very well if they interpret to their native language. But if they interpret a language that is not their native, this is not impossible, but it poses a very significant challenge.
Before we have the interview, I noticed that during our conversation, like you have experience and you have you memorize vocabularies almost in every subject, like every field in life, like medicine, physics, chemistry, technology, almost everything. How necessary is that for interpreter to have the knowledge for all that subjects?
Actually, a high level of knowledge of a wide range of vocabulary for an interpreter is a must. It is not just necessary, particularly for interpreters who aspire to work in, maybe don't let us say a multicultural environment, but let us say that an environment that is exposed to a wide range of subjects. For example, if you are an interpreter just helping maybe tourists or foreigners like me at the beginning of my experience, then you will be okay with just a limited range of vocabulary. But a professional interpreter, a qualified interpreter who is working, for example, in multiple areas, not just in tourist sections, but in multiple areas, maybe in international organizations, you definitely need to have a very good knowledge of vocabulary. And let me give a practical example. The people who interpret in international organizations like the UN Security Council, we usually think that they just need to have knowledge of vocabulary in politics. But actually, this is not true because these international organizations discuss many multiple topics. For example, if there is a nuclear danger in some place, they will be discussing nuclear bombs. And interpreters need to have a very good knowledge of engineering-related vocabulary. If there is a health crisis, if there is something like coronavirus, then the interpreters need to have a good level of knowledge of vocabulary in medicine, for example. So a wide range of vocabulary for an interpreter is a must.
So the question, it will be the one before the last. So what are the challenges that you faced during your working as interpreter, and how did you overcome that challenge?
Okay, so the very first challenge I faced at the beginning was the large number of words that I needed to know, the wide number of accents that I needed to familiarize myself. Sometimes I got a speaker whose accent is almost like a British accent. Sometimes I got a speaker who was from India, his accent was hugely different. So for this particular section or this particular challenge, an interpreter needs to listen to as many accents as possible, and familiarity with almost any accent is indispensable. The second challenge for me was that when I started interpreting, I usually got lost in my mind because I have one speaker in one hand, and at the same time I want to interpret to another listener. For example, like live interpreting in a conference. This is not something easy because the speakers are speaking and the listeners are waiting. So my mind needs to work on two different, sections or two different parts. For overcoming this challenge, I needed to have had a very comprehensive training on knowing when to stop. For example, when the speakers pause, they will not speak very continuously, but when they pause, I also need to pause in my mind and shift the focus, maybe from the speaker to the listener. And I needed to keep balance in grammar. For example, I'm translating to Arabic. I needed to make sure that every word is correct, is in its right place. This required a very comprehensive training, and it cannot just happen overnight.
The last question, what is your advice for the person who want to be interpreter
My very first piece of advice for anyone who is willing to be an interpreter is that interpreting is a profession. It has its rules, it has its guidance, it has even its own regulations, because we know that mistakes in interpreting can lead to wars even sometimes. So interpreting is not something easy. Interpreters first of all need to have a very good level of knowledge, in fact a mastery of their native language, the language they want to interpret to, and the second language they speak or they want to interpret from. Thirdly, I always repeat the fact that comprehensive training. Interpreters should not just stick to one field. Yes, if you are an interpreter, you are working, for example, at university level, interpreting academic conferences related to environment. Yeah, that is okay. You are in your comfort zone. But believe me, in one of those sessions, in your so-called comfortable zone, you will come across maybe new words. You will come across a new accent. You will be required maybe to interpret, to be a live interpreter for a very fast speaker. So interpreters need to prepare for this challenge by doing comprehensive training, by gaining the necessary professional certificates, and above all by remembering that interpreting and interpretation is a profession. It has its rules, it has guidance, it has its regulations.
Mr. Isama, thank you so much. It was a nice advice, and I hope it will help everybody who want to be an interpreter in the future. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.